So I'm sure the audience understands by now that like the people that are associated with the Engage Podcast Network are incredibly amazing people, like really amazing young people that we are currently working with, people that create content on an everyday basis, content that is benefiting you young people, and people that are just shaping the future. And that's what this platform is about. And I've got one such future shaper here who is the host of the Africa Matters podcast. And her name is Farai Mubaiwa. Farai, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. And how are you doing?
I'm awesome. I'm excited for your podcast. You've created so much content. I've been following you for a while. And like, it's just like a matter of time for, you know, all the content that you've created to culminate into the podcasting space. And, you know, for the purpose of the audience, just so they can understand the kind of person I'm talking about, Farai is an activist, a community organizer, an impact maker, and an African development maverick. And I mean, that's such an incredible, you know, collection of adjectives for one individual. You're just so accomplished, Farai. And this is where I want to start with you, right? I've seen your TED Talk, I've seen so much of your work, and there's this conundrum and there's this narrative that like the African youth boom is a curse upon the continent. The fact that we have over 200 million young people on the continent is a resource curse, it's trouble for the continent, but you disagree.
Unpack that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the first thing that's important to understand is that when a continent has got so many youth, it is an opportunity for so much potential. Yeah. It's an opportunity for economic growth, for economic expansion. It's an opportunity for communities to thrive, especially because young people have energy. And when the energy and potential of young people can be harnessed. Sorry, do you hear that sound going off in the background?
Yes.
The clicking sound.
Yes.
It's my boss.
Oh, okay.
Let me quickly exit WhatsApp. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay. Would you be able to cut this?
I will. But
okay,
don't worry, like even if there are sounds, blah, blah, I think at this point we chilled. As long as
perfect.
Fine. If someone walks out back at the background, it's fine. You know, don't worry about it. It's very natural.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
So,
let's carry on from there, from where you were from the end of the question. So is it an opportunity or is it a curse to have over 200 million young people on the African continent?
It's definitely an opportunity. The only reason, from my perspective, Africa's youth boom is seen as a curse is because it's Africa. And for the longest time, our narrative has been painted as one which is dark and black and poor, and that is going nowhere. But if you think about it, any continent that has got such a youthful population means that there's so much energy, there's so much potential, there's so much hope, there's so much innovation in it.
Yeah.
And like you said, Africa's got over 230 million young people.
Jeez.
Now, if our young people are invested in terms of skills, education, and we develop strong social infrastructure, then this has to be an economic burden. This has to be an opportunity for our continent. And my belief is that if we grow young people and we develop young people, Africa will continue to go forward and upwards. And that is what I am committed to doing and what Africa Matters does every single day.
So what I want to, I mean, like, that's real. And that's, you know, it definitely is an opportunity. And I really see it the same way. And like, you know, there's just a prevailing, what can I call, apathy amongst young people, amongst people in general, where everything is relegated to the government and big business. And people are like, yeah, we have such a huge African youth population, but we don't have policies that match the cultivation of this population of young people, or we don't have governments that are able to absorb the jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What role can we play as active citizens, even outside of big, broad government and big business?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing that we have to realize as young people and as active citizens is that change is not going to it's not going to be driven by governments or by big business.
Yeah,
Change has to be driven by us, and all too often there's a reliance on the government to get things done. But how we have to look at things is that we are in partnership with the government. So we play our part, the government plays their part, and we
yeah,
hold each other accountable on that level. So
yeah,
my encouragement to people is always, I mean, what are you doing to advance your society? If you see that something is not working, then take action. And the more action we take, the better we can work with government to address these issues. From a policy perspective, there are so many youth policies. If I'm not mistaken, almost every single African country has got a youth policy. We
yes.
also have the African Youth Charter. We
Mm,
are very quick to say that our governments are not upholding our national youth policies or our youth charters. And yes, that can be true in many circumstances. But what are we doing in our own capacity to also uphold that? So I believe that the more partnership we have between us as your citizens, your government, and your big business, the better change we can see. The
yeah,
quick example I want to share of youth activism is in Ethiopia. Africa Matters hosted a workshop for the first time this year in Ethiopia. We advertised, I think, a week
amazing.
before I was there. We
Yeah.
had over 400 signups for a space of only 30 workshop participants.
Oh my goodness.
400 signups. And that shows you the hunger that youth have to drive change in their communities. The workshop took place on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
You would not believe that the library, which we use the public library there, was full to capacity.
Oh
I
my.
have never seen a library in SA that has been full to capacity, let alone on a Saturday morning. And that shows you that we have to be drivers of change. We have
Absolutely.
to grasp different opportunities. We have to say, all right, there's this issue within my community. I'm going to be the one to fix it. Or I'm going to approach different people so that we can fix it collectively.
Sure.
That is how we change policy, and that's how we change our society.
I could imagine also a large part of it is like an underlying spirit of Pan-Africanism and an undying love for your continent. Because, just to kind of pet something else here, there's a huge population, or at least a significant population, of profoundly talented young people that we lose to very big multinational corporations, to overseas liberal governmental structures that aren't African governmental structures, etc. How do we harness the immense talent that we already produce on the continent and the immense talent that we already have, especially young talent, people like you? How do we have more of you and keep them on the continent?
And keep them on the continent, sure. I agree with you that we definitely have to drive home Pan-Africanism.
Sure.
There is so much growth and hope and prosperity in the continent that if we start from a school's perspective, we're just not being taught about it.
Yeah.
I remember in high school, I didn't learn anything about the rest of the continent. The only African thing I learned was about apartheid. And even then, it was mostly white narratives being captured,
Sure.
not that of what happened to our Black brothers and sisters. Post high school, when it came to knowledge about the African continent, I had to go out and get it. And I guess now things have changed slightly, so there's a lot more positive information about the continent and growth
Yes.
and ways for young people to be involved. But there has to be a collective sharing of knowledge. As young people, we all have to realize that we have our parts in our society.
Yeah.
What I often encourage those who are in university, who are drawn to the pool of working for multinationals or going to live in Australia or whatever the pool is to say to yourself, when you are deciding on what to study and what to do next, ask yourself, what would be best for Africa's growth? How can I play my part in contributing to Africa's growth?
It's powerful.
And
Yeah.
often when you think that what is best for you is based overseas, it's actually based here.
Yeah.
Because you can still be an engineer, you can still be an accountant, you can still be whatever job you want to do while focused on building Africa.
Sure.
And the more of us who are building our continent, the more opportunities we create for those afterwards to flourish. And my hope is that 5 to 10 years from now, working and having one's livelihood on the continent will be the automatic choice. Instead of saying, I want to go to Australia or I want to go to the UK,
Amen.
you'll start saying, all right,
Yeah.
I want to go to Kenya. I want to go to Rwanda. How can I enjoy and understand innovation there? One last thing is that we often think that development is based in these what's still seen as first world economies.
Oh, yes.
But from a development perspective, that's not the case. If we look at your emerging economies today, you have countries like Rwanda, Kenya, that are doing so much better than a lot of your westernized countries are doing. If I'm not mistaken, not so long ago, Ethiopia had the highest GDP just after China.
Sure.
Now that's incredible. That should show you that this continent is moving. The only problem is that we still associate growth and prosperity with what the West is doing. But if we look at our countries and our continent, if we look at Southeast Asia, if we look at Latin American countries, they're all spearheading development. And it's development led by your countries in the global South. And if we as young Africans can realize that, damn, this continent's moving and I have a big part to play in how it moves and where it goes to, let me get involved now, then we'll be able to reap the rewards of our labor really, really quickly.
I mean, like you mentioned something so key, development, the developmental imperative, and how different people, different actors in the African economy, whether it be states, whether it be businesses and individuals, have to have development at the center of their objectives and intentions, etc. And I mean that's profound. But like, just to delve into you as an individual, you know, again, it's very easy to grow up and to be influenced by Western media, not to say it's bad media necessarily, but like to aspire outside of the continent, to not necessarily have the continent as a whole on your mind, especially someone who grew up in South Africa with a little bit of South African exceptionalism in the air, in the country itself. When did you start falling in love with the continent? And when did Africa become a central part of your identity?
I am blessed to have grown up in a Pan-African household. Wonderful. My dad is Zimbabwean, my mom is South African. So I've always felt as though I don't belong, which in a weird way has been the best thing for me.
Sure.
I never felt South African enough in different spaces. I still don't often feel South African enough or Zulu enough, and I've never felt Zimbabwean enough. I still don't feel Shona enough. So that made me search a lot to understand, instead of looking at what it means to be South African or what it means to be Zimbabwean, what does it mean to be an African?
Sure.
And how can I then ensure that everything I do is not just advancing a certain nationality, but is advancing nationalities, that is advancing young Africans. And so the older I became, the more I grappled with identity and questions, the more I leaned in towards unpacking and discovering this continent and what it has to offer.
For sure.
And the more I asked different questions on African identity, like, can you be a feminist and African? Can you be white and African? Can you be LGBT and African? And in asking one of these questions, the more history you uncover and unpack, the more myths you realize have been cast on Africa, and the more you fall in love with the continent.
Oh, yes.
And that's where I am at the moment, and that's where I hope to continue to be. And I've just ensured now that I'm very, very intentional in just how I do things and what I say. What's been really fantastic also is having a partner that is just as passionate about the continent as I am. And then us saying together, okay, cool, we're going to be based in South Africa for XYZ years. After that, we want to move to this African country or that African country.
Amazing.
And contribute to growth there.
Yeah.
So that has been the focal point for me. And I'm hoping that as my journey continues, the impact will be made not only within South Africa or where the countries where Africa Matters is active, but in even more African countries.
Sure. That's really powerful. And just like to piggyback on that, I remember, I think I might have had this conversation with you privately while I was still talking to you about this podcast. And, you know, what I found interesting about your brand is that it's so if you're in the university environment and you come across quote unquote Pan-Africanists, it's usually very, you know, masculine men, you know, hotepi, kind of people. You know what I mean? It's usually associated with the strong man and his wife and his queen, etc. And you've subverted that completely and equalize the playing field. Just, I don't really have a question, but can you just comment on that? On how the you know, the brand of people that are Pan-African is largely male, and just you being in the environment completely changes that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first thing to realize about our continent and its links, I guess, then with Pan-Africanism is that African women have always been at the forefront of revolutions and at the forefront of liberation. The only issue is that when documenting the history of this, it is not often seen, it is not often paid attention to.
Yes.
But there are centuries and centuries of African women either leading their cultures, leading protests, ensuring that their husbands who were imprisoned or let out. We see in South Africa the March on the Union buildings. We've seen the Sierra Leonean feminist Adelaide Casey Halford, who coined the term Pan-Africanism. I mean, it goes back and back, and that's what's made me proud. And more than proud, that's what made me confident in changing this narrative that Pan-Africanism is only for men. Sure. It's to say no, to stand for the African continent means that you need to understand the continent's history. Yeah. And very often the different conversations, I mean, I've been in quite a number of Pan-African groups on Facebook where the conversation is just nonsense. You hear of people saying, no, homosexuality is not African at all. Yeah. And I always just share article links when people say that, to say, right, let's look at the history of it. Before the missionaries came to our continent, homosexuality was a common practice in many of our cultures. In fact, if you wanted to prove that you were a man, you had to sleep with another man. Sure. That was then the ultimate test of proving your manliness. Yeah. It's only once the missionaries came that homosexuality was deemed evil, that feminism was deemed evil. But people don't know this because we don't read enough about our culture. Yeah. And yet we want to say we are Pan-Africanism, that we're Pan-African. But the more we read about our culture, the more we understand the complexities of our continent. And I think the complexities are what makes it beautiful. The more we can actively say, I am a Pan-African and I am for the growth of this continent. In my engagements with a lot of male Pan-Africans, particularly those on some different groups on Facebook, at times they're the most Afrophobic people. Yeah. And I wonder, how can you be Pan-African and be Afrophobic? To be Pan-African is to stand for the African brother and sister. It is to say no to any forms of discrimination against them, because you ultimately want the prosperity and unity of all. And when you don't do that and you're acting counter to that, then you are not a Pan-African. Sure. So it's just about engaging with our history and also surrounding yourself with people that share that same understanding, that same history as well. Yes. To particularly discuss what you had mentioned about very often this idea of the African king and then his queen. Yeah. My partner and I have changed that around significantly to say, but African relationships can be equal, just like any other relationship can be
Absolutely.
Equal.
Yeah.
It's about how are you both empowering one another to be the very best version of yourself. How do you have the African royalty, the African queen and African king working together to achieve what is best for society? And I think that's been possible and will continue to do that as we navigate throughout this life.
Sure. Wow. I mean, I could go really, if we had so much more time, this could have been a podcast on its own, just to unpack, you know, your thoughts on a number of things. because I think as a continent, because of the amount of erasure that's happened over the past couple of centuries, we are, as 21st century young people, we are on a mission to rediscover ourselves as African people. So there's so much to talk about as a result.
Absolutely.
So much to talk about. But let me try to narrow it down. Because I think what's fantastic is that you're a young person that's doing something about all of the things that you care about, and you are a founding member of the Africa Matters Initiative. So talk to us a little bit about the Africa Matters Initiative before we even delve into the podcast stuff.
So Africa Matters was born out of a university idea in 2015. Basically, myself and the other co-founder, Rianne, thought to ourselves, two things. Firstly is that Africa has a young population that's always being seen as something negative. Our youth boom has always been said that it's going to devastate our economy.
Yeah.
What part can we play as young people to change that? That was our first reasoning. The second reasoning is that when we hear of different incidents in Africa, they always take second place. What was most significant was the Charlie Hebdo attacks that took place in Paris, France in January 2015.
Yes.
Where, if I'm not mistaken, 14 people were massacred as a result of terrorist attacks.
Yes.
3 days later in Baga, Nigeria, over 2,000 people were massacred as a result of terrorist attacks. The world did nothing. Sure. Everyone said, "Je suis Charlie." Our African leaders went down to Paris to go and march down the streets. Yeah. But we're all silent about what happened in Nigeria.
They were front row.
Exactly. But yet 2,000 people were massacred on our own soil. And as Africans, we didn't even pay too much attention to it. So we then said, if we want Africa to matter to Africans, let alone to the rest of the world, we need to do something about it. We need to create an organization that not only upskills Africans, but that educates Africans. Yeah. And if we can achieve that, then we would have played our part. So the organization grew from what started off as a movement to now a fully fledged NPO. And yeah, it's been a good journey, a very tough journey as well. For sure. Something that we just thought would be something that we had in university, but that has still grown on now. I think we are 4 years out of uni, or 3 years out of uni, and it's still continuing. And it's been significant to see just what passion can do. We often tell, whenever we're applying for funding, which is really tough, we always say we have had limited funding, but infinite amounts of passion. Wow. And that's what's got us to where we are today.
Yeah. And how does it feed into the podcast? So as audiences who are currently watching this, what should they expect in a typical season of the Africa Matters podcast?
First of all, expect the common disclaimer that is in the beginning of every podcast, which is to say, if you're looking for a podcast about Africa being poor and dark and hopeless, then this is not the podcast for you. Yeah. But if you're looking for a podcast that speaks of Africa's growth and prosperity that is driven by young people, for young people, with young African experts from across the continent sharing their insights on different thought-provoking topics, where we debate, where we find solutions, where we just shape the Africa we want, then this is the podcast for you. Sure. We've got some incredible speakers. Already episode 1 and 2 have been filmed. Episode 2 looks at the hashtag not too young to run and the role that young people can play in shaping the political leadership of countries. We'll be having episodes on, why it's important for young people to go into education, yes, women's rights, youth unemployment. How do we solve that huge issue in Africa? I mean, what's amazing is that all of these episodes, all of the speakers are under 35. Yeah. And that is what makes us unique. Young Africans driving solutions for Africa.
Sure. And I can imagine also, just from a content point of view, this coronavirus pandemic and how it's affected your continent is also somewhat a part of the conversation. I mean, what's the perspective from an African Matters point of view anyway?
Sure. I mean, the coronavirus has taught us so much from different angles. The first is that it's taught us that the West is not invincible. Mm-hmm. Very often this idea of Western invincibility has been a thing, but it's shown us that it's not. And I think it sounds unfortunate, but perhaps that is what Africans needed to realize. That the West isn't invincible. And we've got some damn good African leaders here. If you just look at how our leaders have addressed the virus in different countries, from Rwanda to South Africa to Senegal, it's been absolutely incredible.
Oh, yes.
But it's also been a wake-up call for us to say, before COVID-19, our economies, most of them were struggling. And we also had high levels of youth unemployment.
Yes.
Post-COVID-19, we are already seeing economic declines of up to 7% even in South Africa.
Sure.
Now, wherever there's economic decline, there will then be high levels of youth unemployment, particularly in a continent that is bursting with youth unemployment and bursting with this youth boom. So what do we then do? And I think COVID-19 has made conversations and action driven by young Africans so much more important.
Oh, yes.
What do we do? Because we have to take action now. All of those who have great ideas to be social entrepreneurs, bring those ideas out now, because we have to play our part in changing and empowering our continent.
Yeah. And I feel like it's the kind of plague that has basically accelerated the future. And, it's just about what you're going to do as a state, as a continent, to come out of this as winners. And you're correct. I mean, like, our African leaders have done so well, during this crisis, and we're going forward and forward. One last question I want to ask, and this is a question that I've been asking every podcaster. And you can dive deep as much as you need to. And this question is, what does this content mean to you?
For me, and I can say for the Africa Matters team, this content is more about just producing really good speakers out there.
Sure.
It's more about just having conversations about issues that we feel like having. It's about having critical conversations to inspire even one young African to do something.
Sure.
I think we would have achieved our objective if even one person just listens to a podcast and says, you know what, that's what I needed to go and do X, Y, and Z. And their action doesn't have to be big. It's about each of us playing our part through big or small actions. So the content for us is about inspiring change for even just one person. And if we even just have one listener, then that's more than enough to know that we've done something right.
Yeah. Look, if you have one listener, that means I'm not doing something right. So we're going to make sure that doesn't be right. But thank you so much for your time, Farai. I think, that mission statement, that why in the end there is so profound. And, at the end of the day, we are the inheritors of this future. We are the heirs to this African continent, and we belong and we live and we breathe here. And, it is initiatives such as yours that remind us and compel us to do the work that we need to be doing to uplift and advance the cause and the development of our continent. And may more and more and more people listen to this, and more people get inspired to take action. And I think what I love about the work that you're doing as well is that it is, at the core of it, is the development of people. That's something I'm also passionate about. That's why I resonate with your content so much, because it is truly about the development of people in a world where, we are just cast aside. We'll just redefine that for ourselves. Yeah. Thank you so much. And good luck for the podcast. I can't wait for it to launch.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity. We're excited to be part of the Engage Podcast Network.
It's a huge pleasure. Thank you.
Right, awesome.